is connection to monitoring. When we have a host, and we don't know whether and how it is compromised. So when we connect it to our monitoring program, we need to understand what it is that we are connecting. There are some behavioral analyzers, and what's important for us to make sure that we don't connect a affected host. We can gather triage information, make sure that it's okay, and then take it in for monitoring. To give you an example, there's a Bittrex website, and we take it into our monitoring program. Because there may be many vulnerabilities, it could be compromised, especially if the site is public. Before doing that, I would want to gather triage information and analyze it. And the fourth use case is testing. Any kind of testing. Suppose we don't know what would happen to the host when we launch triage, how much resources it would take, and whether prod would work altogether. Or we want to understand what traces our in-house red team leaves and whether we need to gather additional information in SOC. These are four main scenarios. There could be more. It depends on your processes. How do you collect triage? There's a generic algorithm that you could use. First is to deliver the necessary tool to the host by any means, or to install a tool if it has to be installed. Second, to obtain all permissions and rights, and if it has to be configured, then to configure it. Then launch the tool and wait for completion, and it could be a long time wait. We'll talk about that later. And finally, collecting results and analyzing it. What will we use to collect triage? I will compare four tools. For Linux, the first thing that comes to mind is Linux Cat Scale. Second, UAC. The third tool, which can do more than triage.
Функция такая есть. Это Velociraptor.
But it can do triage as well. That's Velociraptor.
Не совсем создан для триажа.
And the fourth one, not quite built for triage, but the information that it gathers can be treated as triage under a number of conditions, and that is OS Query.
Действительно, можно и потриажить с помощью Query.
Indeed, you can do triage with OS Query. And let us separately look at each of those tools before we proceed to comparison. Linux Cat Scale. That is two scripts and a configuration for Logstash. The first script runs data collection and prepares a container. The second script lets us quickly extract information.
Последний коммент был 5 месяцев назад, то есть данный проект.
The last comment in that thread was 5 months ago, so that's not an abandoned project. It's active. It keeps being updated. And you can see that you upload the results in OpenSearch or other repository. Next, UAC. UAC is an SSH script as an interface, some binaries and YAML configurations. It requires a full release directory
забрать релиз-архив, его распаковать.
So we need to not just download the script, but to download the full distributive, unpack it, and then work with it. It has great capabilities in terms of configuration of what we collect. The most recent commit was a month ago, which means that it is actively supported, and the commit was related to artifacts in data collection.
Следующий
The next one is Velociraptor.
Он требует заранее развернутый
It requires a deployed Velociraptor server
triage-инструмент.
that would prepare the triage tool.
Build-offline collector.
The build-offline collector function helps create a binary that we have to deliver and launch. It has
Процесса сбора
broad
данных. И позволяет
configuration options
Velociraptor сервер
for data collection and preparation.
был несколько
The
дней.
most recent commit was just several days ago. This is an actively supported tool. OS query
Развернутый на хосте, значит, мы должны
requires a service deployed on the host, so we need to install it before we can
поскольку
collect triage data.
дает возможность представить информацию о хосте как о базе
It
данных, значит, мы должны подготовить
Provides information on the host as a database, which means that we need to prepare SQL requests that we will launch that would implement our triage. You can gather information from a large number of hosts
инструменты, как
if you use additional tools such as Fleet.
и если мы не просто
And
сделаем наши запросы, а
if we not only develop our queries but also implement a pre-processing algorithm, we can use SQL capabilities. This is also an actively supported tool. So how do we
эти инструменты,
compare
конечно же, чтобы сравнить инструменты,
these tools?
критерии сравнения.
To compare, we need to prepare comparison criteria. And I have two buckets of criteria. Let's start with the first one. That is the operation criteria.
Как нам будет удобно доставить инструмент,
That
запустить, что нам для этого
Talks about how convenient it is to deliver the tool, how long it takes to prepare it, how long it takes to wait for the launch. All things related to operation and subsequent operation, result analysis. And secondly, the second bucket, analytical criteria.
потребляемые данные, что мы
They
собираем, что мы
compare the
выделил 6
data, what is collected, what is not collected. I've come up with 6 criteria. Apparently, there could be more. So the first criterion
операционных систем
of operation is what operating systems.
можно почерпнуть либо в документациях,
This comes from either documentation
либо
to the tools,
их интерфейсе, либо в README.
or from their interface, or from
Не совсем удобно.
the README file.
Табличку
And I have prepared a comparison table for you
можем собрать с каких.
about which operating systems they work in.
Основное, что можно выделить, это с операционной системой Windows, Velociraptor и Query.
And you can see that for Windows, we have Velociraptor as OS and OS Query as the candidates. And UAC
Linux-системам.
is the broadest coverage of Linux systems.
Удобство применения. Как запустить инструмент.
Usability, how you launch the tools.
И UAC очень похожи.
USCatScale and UAC are very similar.
Скриптом
They can be launched
в одну
with a script, with a simple sequence of commands in just one line. The only difference is that UAC will require to be unpacked, and you would have to go into the directory. But other than that, very straightforward and convenient. Velociraptor
коллектора.
needs to prepare an offline collector. To do that, you need to use a special interface.
Настроим коллектор.
Once you have configured the collector and all the artifact collectors, the Velociraptor server would give us the binary that we need to deliver and launch. So it's a bit more sophisticated in terms of preparation.
графическом интерфейсе.
You could potentially avoid dealing with the graphic interface,
Мы можем
because after the preparation comes configuration. We can feed this configuration directly to the executable of Velociraptor server to get the collector.
и OS-query.
And finally, OS query.
Сразу задаст вопрос, какие
It would
вопросы вы хотите
ask us
исполнять.
right away what queries we want to carry out. There are open source projects similar to what you can see on the screen, where there are pre-set queries. But in my example, I used these queries, and also according to the OS query documentation, I took all the tables with
Цели
a complete
с помощью конструкции where.
options, with an exception.
Если мы подытожим, то Linux Cat Scale ее
Summarizing, Linux Catscale and UAC use a simple command sequence, and Velociraptor and OS query requires some preparation. Velociraptor requires to fire up a separate server,
подготовку,
and OS query
разворачивание на сам хост, с которого мы будем собирать данные.
requires to be deployed on the host from which we want to collect data.
Мы будем запускать наши triage
Next, what do we want to launch the triage tools on?
сервера для экспериментов. Первый
I have come up with two experimental servers. First, a VPS server, and secondly, the corporate machine that launches malware to test the CM rules.
запускаем наши инструменты.
We launch our tools
Обычно, когда мы триажим машину, либо
when we do triage or delegate this to someone else. People
прежде чем можно забирать и передавать.
have this concern how much they would have to wait until they can
Получилось, что до 10 минут
start getting information. In our tests, that was within 10 minutes.
выбивается велосираптор, сбор.
That's the time of data collection. Velociraptor takes
Есть одна из причин.
less time, and there's a reason for that we'll discuss later. And the second reason is in the configuration that I applied. Every tool gathers the most complete information possible
глубокого конфигурирования, просто сам
that it can obtain without a deeper configuration using just the out-of-the-box version. So on average it's 10 minutes, but sometimes gathering triage can take up to a couple of hours. I'll talk about that later. The volume of data that we will have in our triage processes.
две категории. Первое это самый
Two categories: the tool itself, what amount of data we need to transfer. In 2024, a 10 gigabit network is probably a standard, but in my practice, I had experience of working through
можно выделить.
duplex satellite channels and other exotic options. So in this case, you can look at Linux Catscale. It's very light. I think that if needed, you could even deliver it through a fax machine.
Объемный для ускорения.
UAC is also quite small. Velociraptor is quite big. For OS query, I took the distributive for the deployment as a server. Next, the volume of data collected, up to 1 gigabyte on average, maybe more, depending on what
получаемых данных.
there is on the machine.
OS-query
OS query is or stands apart
самих журналов.
because it doesn't gather the logs themselves. We can get information about the state of the machine, but we cannot get the log files.
Утилизация ресурсов.
Resource utilization.
Это на самом деле очень важный момент.
That's a very important point that I've never thought about previously. But it happens
Без ограничения на утилизацию ресурсов обойтись нельзя. Например,
there are cases when that is an important parameter. For example, when we get a triage from a prod machine that runs business-critical services and you cannot allocate 100% of resources. If you run the triage tool without limitation, then it will compete with business applications that could lead to negative consequences. Linux Catscale and UAC do not have the feature to limit resource utilization. UAC supports multi-threading up to 4 cores. Velociraptor has the best multi-threading capabilities out of the tools that I review. And it has an inbuilt feature of reducing CPU utilization up to 1%. OS Query also implements limitations up to 5% without modification of the code. So your utilization, CPU utilization could be as low as 5% with that tool. Convenience of reviewing results. It is pleasant that a tool does something to make the life easier for the analyst. Linux Catscale gives us a logstash configuration so that you could analyze that in Kiban or in Elastica. UAC is the most conservative. It returns original outputs of commands. Velociraptor and OS Query return either JSON or CSV. Velociraptor also has a graphic interface where you can analyze and prepare configurations to roll out to other users. Recreation slide. This one is needed because later we'll discuss analytical comparison criteria. But before we proceed to that, I want to look deeper at the tools, to go under the hood, so to say, to understand where they have the features, the components that are responsible for data collection and what would be collected. Okay, so Linux Catscale is an SSH script. It could even be seen as a textbook for response specialists because it lists all the commands that you want to launch for information gathering. You can modify them, of course, by adding your own. It's very straightforward. UAC, already a little bit more sophisticated because here there are binaries that read YAML configurations. All artifacts collected will be in YAML configurations. There are many of these, they are well documented, and you can supplement them with custom-made configurations if you need them. Velociraptor has a graphic interface to create an offline collector. Every artifact collector has its own documentation, its own configuration, and its specific features. There are some pitfalls here. If we prepare an incorrect configuration for one of the artifact collector, we can bring down the whole triage collection tool, and the collection process will not complete successfully, which means that we need to provide for testing. We will need to first launch it on a test machine to see if everything is okay, if everything works well. OS Query has extensive documentation on tables, OS Query scheme. For every operating system, it provides the tables and the data collected. And if you want to understand what is being collected, the documentation is not enough, and you'd have to review the product. The product is written in C and C++. Some preparation is required to understand that, but we wouldn't be looking at the codes now, apparently.
артефакта выглядит таким
The
образом.
full
Естественно,
table of artifact comparison looks like this.
поскольку таблица очень большая.
This is a big table, and it's not readable on the slides. I've come up with 319 criteria.
Посмотреть примеры по тем 6 категориям.
I suggest that we look
Я выделил.
at the examples
Первое, собираем информацию.
in the categories that I have
Тут видно,
discussed previously. First,
что собирать в целом.
information gathered on processes. We can see that
Заложен
every solution is doing well, but we need to understand the concept behind each of the tools.
они поменялись местами.
You can see that UAC and Linux Cat Scale have swapped their places, and that's for a reason. UAC has the
Сбор артефактов и все остальные инструменты.
broadest configuration in terms of artifact collection, and all other tools are collected to that. Yes, there are some that UAC doesn't have, but UAC has most.
Показательный пример по процессам.
And also
О Square, конечно же, есть.
a salient example in terms of processes. OS query doesn't have all the tables and not all the data representations that a specialist would want to see. But this is offset
Сложные SQL-запросы.
by us being able to create complicated SQL queries using join and union and to get the necessary data.
Желтенькие квадратики.
And there are some yellow boxes as well.
Что это означает?
That is,
Velociraptor коллектор имеет
or that means fine-tuning.
generic сборщики артефактов.
What that means is that Velociraptor has generic artifact collectors, which means that at the time of configuration, we want to indicate what we want to collect. Something that we don't collect out of the box, but we can choose to collect, such as log files, for example,
Какие-то дополнительные артефакты приложений.
some additional application artifacts. And that is what fine-tuning means,
Желтенькие квадратики — это докрутка.
and hence the yellow boxes.
Приложение.
Applications.
UAC имеет особенность, что
UAC
очень большой скоп прикладных приложений он покрывает.
covers
Собирает
a broad scope of applications. It collects logs, configurations, temp files, session information. This is its main advantage.
информацию даже с какой-то десктопной машины.
If we gather information from a desktop,
Очень большой. И по большей части по самому
we will have
мы информацию получим.
a big log, and we'll get information on most popular applications. Velociraptor collector can do the same, but it has to be
Докрутка.
initially prepared. Some fine-tuning is required,
Сборщик артефактов.
and quite a lot of configuration of artifact collector. Linux Cat Scale and OS Query don't work with such data.
Мы журналы.
Next, logs collected.
Есть момент, когда у нас видно, что UAC
Here you can see that UAC doesn't cover everything, and Linux Cat Scale is ahead of it on the var crash
Velociraptor коллектор.
directory. Velociraptor collector
Докрутки, без нее
again requires fine-tuning. You can't do without it because out of the box it doesn't offer an awfully rich data set.
который мне очень нравится.
And there's one thing that I particularly like with UAC,
Файлов.
that is the search for all files and directories that have the word log in it.
UAC все равно
Even if you missed something, UAC would still collect
основные
this data.
инструменты, все инструменты собирают. Сеть.
Network.
Тут картина хорошая, можно использовать любой инструмент, если
Here
надо
we have
артефакты.
a good situation. We can
Собирает не все.
gather quite a broad range of artifacts. Linux Cat Scale doesn't collect everything as in other
Файловая система
areas.
картина ровно та же самая.
The file system, the picture is pretty much the same.
Собираются. Это
The
файл, который
most important things are collected,
информацию, которая
such as the body file that contains important information which is needed when analyzing triage. You can see all the artifacts in this table now.
отдельно отметил виртуализацию. и контейнеры.
I also put separately virtualization and containers.
Интересный момент, что OSQuery
Interestingly, OS Query doesn't work with virtualization altogether,
собираются.
but others do collect the most important things. UAC has the biggest completeness, Linux Cat Scale is a little bit behind, Velociraptor requires fine-tuning of configuration. And if we gather statistics on the artifacts collected, we can see the following.
Linux Cat Scale и OSQuery собирают примерно
Okay, the Linux Cat Scale and the OS query, they take 1/3 of this. So this is openly available information and easily available information, which will be enough to understand and analyze triage. UAC is the most complete in terms of the data collecting. Velociraptor collects the least data, but there you can have more space for setting configurations. In the latest releases of Velociraptor, UAC was released as a standalone collector for the data. So inside of Velociraptor, you already have the UAC. And all the artifacts collected by UAC are now there. But there is one big disadvantage here. The data are stored in the initially collected way, so you cannot show it in JSON and so on. Apart from that, I understand that Linux Cat Scale is just a script, so you can also put it in the Velociraptor. And this way you will have the largest coverage of artifacts, but this will ask the largest number of human hours for setting this, configuring this, and debugging it. Okay, now let's talk about an algorithm for picking up the tool. So going down is yes, and going right is no. This is the idea. So we understand that we cannot trust UAC because this tool doesn't have the full open code, so it has binaries. So we'll just remove it from our analysis. So if we use OS query and we have this tool on our machines, we can use it and use the data. And if you don't have enough data, we will proceed. And understand the specifics, for instance, if this is a production machine or if we are limited in some other ways and reasons in terms of using resources, we can use the Velociraptor because it has built-in features in terms of constraints. But if we don't have enough data generated by Velociraptor, we can use Linux Cat Scale or UAC using Velociraptor. If we have the communication channel restrictions and if we are limited in terms of volume, then we can use a Linux Cat Scale. And if we don't have too many restrictions, but we don't have any time to prepare, which often happens, we can use UAC. Otherwise, it's better to prepare an offline collector with Velociraptor. And we also have an option for GigaChats when we have the Velociraptor server and Velociraptor agents installed. We can use this tool for collecting triage without using offline collectors. Well, we can use them just if we badly need them. The overall concept for picking the triage tool, based on the software and operating systems used, we can understand the list of artifacts we are more likely to be interested in. And we can also consider all the specifics our business and our organization has, and we can also understand how many resources we have, so how many human hours we can, how many experts we can invest into this process.
triage-инструмент, мы
This way, we will understand which triage tool should be used in a given situation. For GigaChats, we have the Velociraptor server, we deploy it, we have Velociraptor agents, and we deal with them.
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you for your attention, and I'm here to answer your questions.
Пока я разбираюсь с системой вопросов, если у вас есть
By the way, if you have live questions, you can use the mic and ask it too.
Подскажите, пожалуйста, используете ли вы Velociraptor
Are you
только как
using Velociraptor as a triage tool only, or do you also use it
EDR или
as an EDR or
реагирование
for
EDR?
response?
Спасибо. Вопрос.
Thank you for the question. I got it.
Используем Velociraptor,
We use Velociraptor only for triage,
потому что у нас уже есть
since we have Osquery, for instance, and other things deployed, and that's what we use routinely. And there are some dangers in using Velociraptor, because Velociraptor agent manages the machine with the admin access rights. Within the last 6 months, we've seen Velociraptor CVEs, so it can be dangerous. So we use it only for dealing with triage.
вопрос. Давайте сначала один, потом.
Okay, let's go one by one.
Вопрос от Кирилла.
We have a question from Kirill.
Выбрали конкретно для себя.
Which triage tool did you select and why?
Хороший вопрос.
That's a good question.
Участвовал в подготовке.
Since I was preparing the process for triage,
Как вы поняли,
I think, based on the algorithm I have shared, we picked Velociraptor
потому что он обладает самой,
because it has
можно сказать, полной полнотой и позволяет запускать другие
the
инструменты.
fullest capacity, and it supports the launch of Linux Catscale and UAC and other tools
Следовательно,
from within.
интерфейс Velociraptor
So the Velociraptor server interface lets you save triages, pre-process them, and document them. So this makes it the most convenient tool for us. Hello, Andrei Sikorsky, SideRock. We had a similar task to perform in our environment with a lot of Linux nodes, and we used UAC. In terms of gathering UAC, it is well configured, but it is not ideal from the onset. So did you have to fine-tune the way it collects artifacts, and how it does it?
вопрос понял. По сбору
Got it.
артефактов
In
я
terms of gathering artifacts, well, there wasn't any further honing for UAC
по UAC
there,
есть другая сложность.
but there is another issue there, how to pre-process the triage so that analysts can use it. Yeah, that's the second question. Indeed, I kind of preempted it.
Я использую
I use Jupyter Hub, and I have some Jupyter laptops for pre-processing. And talking about the overall logic, you should parse it line by line. You should bring it together in the pandas data frame, and then you use pandas to correlate them.
Так, давайте просто по первому. Все-таки у нас тут комьюнити трек и...
We have a community track, and we have the security expert community group. I hope you are there. So we have some body of work there. So you mentioned Bittrex, which is a trigger for me. So we researched it. And in UAC, there was a big problem. You can have the path, the user directory, and so on. So you can see where it is installed. and this is not that easy. You should look at the list of launched processes and so on and so forth. And to get these files and other bodies from this, you can use the extension, the image, and so on. UAC doesn't do it. It can show everything, but we're interested in the specific app where it runs and the server and so on. So we have some body of work here, and so if you are interested in this and if you are ready to support this, we can make a fork community and to try to fine-tune it jointly. Maybe we can ask the coordinators these questions. I mean, to have another sidetrack in the chat. And if we find something interesting there, we will share it. Okay, so you use Jupyter laptops for what? For correlation and so on? And how do you normalize it so that you can grab it and search it quickly to put in the process strings and so on? So how to normalize all this motley collection of the UAC output? Is it something you have done? No? Well, I did. But we don't have a comprehensive picture now. So I first converted into CSV and pandas, so this output, and then we correlate this with some other data. So I can do it this way. As for Bittrex, indeed, when we triaged the Bittrex machine, apart from UAC, we asked our colleagues to bring together the apps directory to analyze it. And we put it into UAC. We have a smart script for this. Okay, it turns out that you analyze only one host, so you don't send it to the ELK or ELK. So we just send the ADVX from 1000 nodes to the ELK, and you have the live response to the list of processes to quickly grab them. Or did you do it with the Panda and CSV and so on? Well, we use OS query and we collect this information in an automated way. So our SOC is based on this information. So we already have this information, and we can use other scripts, or we can send direct QQL requests for this. So this triage is to provide more information apart from the things we can collect. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Скажи, а что используете для триажа контейнеров?
What do you use for container triage? Dragon.
Ага, здравствуй, спасибо за доклад.
Hello, thank you. It's really interesting. Angara, response team, and computer forensics.
Собственно, мы тоже используем эти инструменты.
We also use these tools, and I have a set of questions to you. Number one, when this huge spreadsheet was made, I was really impressed. How many? 319 criteria. Well, my hat goes off to you. I can imagine the time you invested into this. Okay. When you added the Ilyomak, so what was the profile used? Full. And what did you use in the jobs? Because you have the IRR triage there too. Did you test it? Well, in full we understand. Full means full. But what about IRR triage? Did you try? Did you compare? No, we didn't. We have some ideas to do it if we have any constraints in terms of the disk space. So if we are limited in terms of the triage volume, then we'll have to fix this configuration. But well, we are glad to say that we use full to avoid problems. Okay, my next question. I think it's quite general. Okay, we can use Raptor for some fine-tuning, we can add some modules. So why don't we use YAML for NGET-scale? Why don't we fix the script for the UAC? Well, we can, but here we are talking about configurations. Velociraptor is built in such a way that this fine-tuning works as configuration of the builder Yeah, and here, or designer, but here we'll have to make a modification, like a fork. Okay, and my final question. 319 criteria. Did they include any comparison of how they deal with file system X3, X4? So did you compare, for instance, scale and UAC? Or in terms of data completeness, for instance. Okay, we can use UAC as a foundation and start from there. Well, I think that I should talk about the way it was done in principle. Well, indeed, I took UAC and all the configurations it has, and at each line in the configuration is one comparison criterion. And then, based on what it does, we look for similar things in Linux get scale, in other collectors like Velociraptor, or in the query documentation. So if we find this, okay. If you don't, no problem. It turned out, in terms of Velociraptor, that we have some generic collectors. You just put in whatever you want and you collect what you want. You don't need any deep research here or deep analytics on these artifacts. At least we haven't done it. Okay, I say it. This was a tricky question because UAC in this case is a little bit better because it collects time stamps when it deals with XT4. So you can do it in an expanded mode. I'm a big fan of UAC, so I'm there to protect it. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Благодарю.
Thank you.
Так. Через Telegram дополнительных вопросов больше нет. Есть ли у вас еще какие-то вопросы?
Any other questions?
Да, я сразу скажу, что
By the way,
вопросы будут
the
доступны.
best question will be awarded with the
Хотел
T-shirt. Thank you.
спросить по поводу критерия поддержки старых
A question in terms of supporting the old kernels and old operating systems. I remember the latest versions, like Velociraptor, they don't support the old servers. Well, say if you respond somewhere in a company, you go there and you see there a server from the 1990s, and there they even don't have Linux tools, and you need to use some bash scripts or some more, low-level tools. So did you support the old kernels? Well, I didn't use this criterion, since based on the machine landscape I deal with, we haven't seen anything like that. But this is quite interesting. Thank you.
Можно его рассмотреть с следующей стороны. Linux get scale.
Well, the Linux get scale and UAC, they are based on the apps which are already there in the host, and they are used for this collection. Velociraptor and Square. So Velociraptor is based on Go, Square is based on CC++. Written in CC++, so they use standard calls of kernel for collection. So if this library doesn't support the old kernels, we will not be able to do anything. And that's why, well, in this case, UAC and scale will be the best options. But if you want an ideal script, you will need the UAC configuration. You'll have to look through it, and you'll have to convert it into a simple script you can add to the Linux get scale, for instance. I think this is the best way out. Thank you. And another question about other collectors. Have you considered FINAC? This is another tool for triage. No, I haven't considered it. Okay, thank you.
Добрый день. Хотел бы задать вопрос.
Hello.
Какие артефакты при сборе триажа?
What are the artifacts you need to collect in your triage to make sure that no anti-forensic techniques were applied on the compromised node? Thank you. That's a very good question.
Triage.
I think that triage won't be enough here. We are likely to need some deeper cutting tools like system calls and their log, for instance, where you can see some means to protect from forensic checks. So if we have some logging for the machine, so not just the syslog, but the ODD with the biggest configuration, and if you use this data, then triage will help, but it will not help without any preliminary work. Okay, and here is my next question. Did you try to use bash history to recover remote commands? Well, I don't think this is about triage. This is about forensics. Okay, thank you. Thank you.